Hey BookTube, I'm reviewing A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood, a 1964 novel. Uh, it rises to consciousness, assembles itself, goes to the mirror, sees itself 58, George, male, comes down the stairs, comes, I believe, into the kitchen where it's so narrow that if there was two people, it would jostle elbows. At which point George realizes Jim is dead, like he's realized for the last year, for however long, Jim is dead, and Jim was his lover, his partner. And now George, a expat Brit who is a professor, is a single man in California. He is living in kind of little suburban straight land where he feels very much just completely isolated. He's in his own little castle of things. There's the kids, the neighborhood kids are driving him crazy. The housewives of the neighborhood seem to, at best, sort of pity him as this kind of poor freak who we're going to tolerate. The big masculine 60s males are all obviously completely threatened by him. They hate him. He is something other, and they feel like he's a threat to whatever they're trying to maintain and hold up. At least that's all. This is all obviously from George's perspective. He's conjured himself into being at the beginning of this day. This is the now. This is going to be a day's journey. And so we go through, this is indeed a day's journey. We go through George's day, him getting into his chauffeur personality to drive himself to work and whipping down the freeways and feeling like, oh, I can be this chauffeur personality. He can be in control, and getting to the college and assuming the professor college persona. Very much, it's all every part of this day from the very beginning of birth of he's constructing himself. He's somewhat holding himself together. He's trying to hold himself together from what's obviously the deep sadness and grief over the loss of Jim, who's been gone for a while. And he's living in such a culture that he hasn't even told anyone that Jim is dead. He's just said that Jim, he went away back east and he's not going to be back anytime soon, and he's gotten rid of all his animals, and it's isolated him more because Jim, of course, Jim was his bridge to the outside world in a lot of ways. Jim could get along with the kids in the neighborhood, probably got along with the neighbors, and now George is this very much singular man without much in the way of a meaningful connection. And indeed, throughout this day, you see George trying to make these meaningful connections. There's this whole thing of him talking in his class and getting to do this lecture where he sort of runs away with himself, where he starts talking about minorities and like how, yes, of course, we hate minorities because they look different than us. They probably think different thoughts and have different ideas, and we see their flaws and we dislike them for it. And we should admit that to ourselves. We shouldn't just try and smooth things over in some kind of liberal sentiment. If we actually kind of confronted this stuff and actually talked about it, we'd be a lot less likely to persecute. And just to acknowledge the fact that if you hate a minority, they're not going to be these paragons of virtue who are going to be beautiful people. You can love someone and they still kind of are gnarly and stuff like that. Someone who's persecuted all the time gets nasty themselves in reaction and has to kind of hold themselves up that way. And indeed, this book is great because while I totally invest in George is also this really confronting, gnarly, crotchety 58-year-old gay guy who there's at one point where he goes to visit this woman who Jim went away with for to sort of see, could I do the straight thing, and he went away with her. And he ended up coming back and saying, oh, no, she's disgusting. And that was that. But he comes into the hospital room and he still has this memory of she's sunken, yellow, kind of hollowed out woman at this point, probably, I guess, something like cancer or something like that. But he can still remember her as the animal, vital, her, and starts talking about her as this sucking vulva, which is just like kind of this really gross other imagery. But it really gets into that kind of thing of, this is, you know, and he says like, oh, I might as well not hate her because it's womanhood in general is a threat to me. Just like George as a gay man might be a threat to these straight 60s dudes in this suburban thing with their happy wives, and we're not going to talk about how I might have different feelings and stuff like that. So it does a really good job of saying, yeah, you know, the society that George is in sucks and is persecuting him, but that, you know, and this is actually a time where he can actually be openly gay. You know, this isn't like he has to be completely closeted. He's partially out of the closet. He's, quote, tolerated. But that it's really good at saying, you know, I'm a flawed human being. I'm a human being who's got stuff that's like, you know, I can hate women in general, for as much of a threat about me about taking away my man as a straight guy might be threatened by a gay guy saying, oh, that threat somehow threatens my masculinity, to have this gay guy who's getting to openly live and to signal some other way of living. So yeah, and I mean, throughout the book, there's this whole thing of George trying to connect. You know, we've got him with his friend Charlotte, which is actually another good example of George as this very flawed human being. Of she's this sort of, in some ways, a horrible caricature of a 60s woman, of a smothering mother. She starts talking about, oh, Fred's left me, and I'm thinking it's like, oh, it's like a boyfriend or something like that. It's like, no, Fred's her son, and she's talking about him sort of like a lover of like, she's left me for another woman. It's like he's a semi-adult young man who's gone off with a girlfriend or something like that, and she's having things. And George meanwhile is sort of like, he's really down, and at the beginning of the day he sort of brushes her off, but as the day progresses he gets into a low spot, and it's like, oh, he actually hooks up with her because, yes, actually her misery is a comfort to him, which, you know, it's like she gets comfort from it, so I guess that's good. But he's also getting like, this is relaxing to me that she's a mess, a complete mess, and stuff like that. Which is, it's another great kind of thing of George being this flawed, lonely, hurt human being, and most of all being a human being and being someone that you're so invested in, and this lovely, to me, which. I think this is a thing that probably attracts me to a lot of Christopher Isherwood, is a kind of a lovely kind of melancholy loneliness of existence, of this struggling to connect, which comes so well through in this book. And there's a beautiful scene in the water, and I don't know what it's about with Californians and water, but because I think about Kim Stanley Robinson and him talking about water in A Short Sharp Shock, a book I reviewed a while ago. And there's just this thing of it, just like, it's the mystical thing of being in the water. And indeed, this happens. He goes for a swim with a student, and they're both naked, but he's like in the water, and he's sparkling with phosphorescence, and it's like sort of, it's him himself alone in his elements. And I mean, he's almost gonna get died, and he almost would, you would think, if he didn't get pulled out by Kenny. But at that moment, he felt, it was like, you know, he felt like it was okay to be alone. It's okay to be a single man. It's okay to be this person. And it's just gorgeous writing throughout this book. A very short, very impactful, very short book that really touches you as you go through this day of this span of existence from coming into consciousness at the beginning of the day to what happens at the end of the day. And that the ending I'm not going to talk about because it's the ending, but the ending in some ways, it sort of puzzles me. And I think it's going to be one of these books I'm going to have to come back to, because it's like, wow, what's up with that ending? Why did Isherwood make the choice he did about how to end things with George? Because it's like, it's coming to being, coming from an kind of physiological thing at the beginning to what happens at the end. It's like, it's really striking, and really, really interesting. The last note I want to talk about is just like, George is this really complex, troubled, confronting human being, and I keep on thinking about Less, from Andrew Sean Greer, as a book where it's a single man who, one of his lovers, older man, has died, and he's sort of going through that, but he's also got a younger lover who's gone off and got married. When I feel like these two books might be actually in dialogue with each other, in some of the ways of just like, they're both sort of in dialogue with the whole thing of the kind of the cultural wars of things, of minorities, of, I think in this book, of George sort of railing against people, are we going to just catalog each other like tourists in an art gallery? Or are we actually going to, like, make a connection individually, one-on-one, to each other, as stuff like that? And I mean, I guess that could come from a place of privilege. I think George has the benefit of being at a point in history as a gay man there where he most definitely was they were just getting into kind of an coming out of, well, I don't know, even then, of being a minority and being able to talk about stuff like that. Whereas I think it's argued, at least in Less, that being a gay man today, 2018, you're a part of the majority, you're part of the privileged few, and your story's been told now by people like Christopher Isherwood back in the 60s. Andrew, it's interesting that, like, that Less seems much less confronting of a figure than someone like George, which in some ways makes George more engaging to me than Less, even though I really love Less. And I mean, Less is served up as a great fellow, maybe a little sorry for himself, whereas George is railing. George is angry, and I like that. There's something about that appeals to me, that George is angry, and that he is going to be shitty to people because he's angry, and he's going to be shitty to people, even when they don't deserve it, and he's funneling anger that he should have from other places to them. Yeah, I'm just rambling here. That was my review of A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood, which has made me realize I should probably go back and check out Less yet again at some point. Probably next year. We'll go with, let's say next year, la la la. In other words, I'll probably look for a copy of Less. And I should also probably look for Miss Dalloway, because apparently Isherwood was reading that influenced him. And I think I've also got an Aldous Huxley book, which George was teaching, and so died the Swan, or, oh God, I can't even remember the name of it now. I probably got it written down somewhere. An Aldous Huxley book that something with swans in it, which I think is how I found it. I went Aldous Huxley Swan, and so I found the book to download. So that's a wonderful thing. I love books that bring up more books, and then you just branch off and you go off in all sorts of fun directions. And I love following trails like that. So that is my review of A Single Man. More videos later.